No? All right. Well, it's going to be a minute. So I've heard from 3 or 4 people that are not. One's sick, one's out of town. Somebody's filling in for somebody. That sort of thing. Said, we'll be in there, but we'll be in there later. Next week, whatever. And so I said, doesn't matter. We're not taking enrollment. We're not checking attendance and all of that. So we'll give it a second, and then if not, we'll move to the lesson. I can tell you ahead of time where we're going to be. We're going to be in Judges chapter 11. Judges chapter 11, verses 29 through 40 primarily. Judges 11, 29 through 40. And it's the story of Jephthah. This series of lessons is going to be on individual passages that Isaac and I have thought over and talked about a little bit that were particularly powerful to us, either Old Testament or New Testament. And he'll discuss why it is to him. I'll discuss why it is to me on each one. So it'll be a potpourri across the text, and sometimes we'll be in the Old Testament, sometimes we'll be in the New Testament. So we're just calling it powerful. Well, we were going to call it powerful passages. Now we're going to call it. I think what they put up on the slide was life-giving and life-altering passages. So that's what we're going with. So Judges 11, chapter 11, verses 29 through 40 is going to kick us off on this series, and hope it'll be beneficial. So if I asked you what you knew about Jephthah, what would you say? Without looking. without looking. Don't know much, yeah. I think most people would say something like that. And if they know some, they're like, well, was he one of the judges? He was one of the judges. Okay, well, that's right. If you remember, Judges finds historically a situation where you've got you've got God's people sort of on the rise and on the decline, and on the rise spiritually speaking, and on the decline. And throughout history of God, how He deals with His people throughout the Old Testament, you see a period of time where God allows them to fall into things because they have chosen to ignore Him or forget Him. He allows the consequences, and then eventually He will hear them and will reclaim them in a specific way. And in Judges, one of the key phrases for us is, 2 phrases that you need to know for the book of Judges is, then again the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. That's the quote in most translations multiple times in that book. Then again the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. And then there is the eventual, because of the cry and the hearing of God and of the eventual and God's perfect timing, okay, now, then something might come up like, and God raised up. Then God raised up, and God raised up a deliverer, and that deliverer is named. Jephthah's one of those. So it's a time for God to raise up. Jephthah is raised up, and in Judges chapter 11, starting in the 29th verse, you get the second half of the chapter, which deals with Jephthah's vow and ultimate victory. Okay? Jephthah's vow and ultimate victory. So we're dealing with a period of time between Joshua's death and the reign of David. And it's kind of a perplexing time in God's people, their life, what they do, what they forget, how God treats them during that time and why. But the context leading up to Jephthah is just this. It's time for God to raise up another deliverer. They're ready for, they've cried out for deliverance. But what do you know about Jephthah? Well, I bet you didn't know this. Jephthah is the son of a harlot. He was kicked out by his family. He was running with a rough crowd, and he was with a group that was going around raiding and pillaging towns. And God's going to raise up a deliverer, and he's going to be that guy. Throughout Scripture, you've got God raising up somebody for a task that is not necessarily who we would think would be raised up. Somebody that has a past, or somebody that has a grave weakness on their resume. Somebody that comes up short on a skill or a talent. In the Old Testament, you can go further back, you can get to Exodus 3 and 4, and you think of Moses, who is leading the way in giving his weaknesses before God. And God says, perfect, right? And Gideon, in this book, Gideon, Judges chapter 6. Why me? Me? You need me to be the deliverer? My family is the least in town, and I'm the least in my family. So I'm the gum on the bottom of the shoe. You're scraping the bottom of the barrel. You want me? Jephthah, similar resume. Not flashy and not who we would assume God would select to deliver his people. That's his context. Son of a harlot, kicked out by his family, runs with a rough crowd who's going around raiding, pillaging towns. What is that a lesson about, just by itself? If we know that about, and whatever else we could know that wouldn't be so good, about Jephthah's past, what does that tell us about our God? What comes to your mind? That He's a God of second chances? That He's a God of mercy? See, when we think of mercy and grace and forgiveness, we need to think of people. And we don't just mean that which we extend to people, but we need to look at that God has always operated this way upon people, toward people. Second, it says God can use anybody to do something that's great. Somebody every once in a while says something. I've had people mention these very words to me: I wish I could do something great in the kingdom. And then they go on to say why they can't. Well, number one, what's great? What's the definition of great? That comment, that attitude, that fear, that lamentation. I'm lamenting the fact that I'm not. That tells me we've got the wrong definition of what it means to be great in the kingdom, or for the kingdom, or impact upon and in the kingdom. I wish I could do. And that's a lesson for another time, but there are no small works in the kingdom. Kingdom work is by its nature great. Whatever the work is in the kingdom, it's by its nature is great. So when you look at Jephthah's resume, what does it tell us about our God? He can use anybody. And obviously here he did, because really Jephthah's not a somebody. He's just an anybody, right? At this point, that's who he is. So the elders of Gilead come and say, we need you. And there's a needed defense of God's people and their God, but they haven't heard anything but by Ammon's king. And you get to verse 29, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and he passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he advanced toward the people of Ammon. Now, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. I want you to hold your place right here and go to Romans. Just hold your place right here and go over to Romans chapter 9 and look at verse 15. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whomever I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whomever I will have compassion. That's the quote from back here. This is the use of that in the book of Romans. What does that speak to? That speaks to God's, not just God's providence, but it also speaks to God's omniscience. Colossians is about His preeminence, the preeminence of Christ. I will have mercy on whom I choose, and I'll do it in the way that I choose, through whom I choose, because I'm sovereign. This speaks to the sovereignty of God. So, you get to verse 29. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed through Mizpah of Gilead, from Mizpah to Gilead, and he advanced toward the people of Ammon. Why did the Spirit of God come upon him? He's not worthy of the Spirit of God. But see, you and I don't choose that. You and I don't get to choose who is worthy for the Spirit of God to work through, to come upon, to work through. I will choose who I want to choose. I'll do it how I want, through whom I want, when I want. I'll have mercy, I'll have compassion. So this is God's choice. And it comes upon Jephthah in verse 29. And Jephthah made a vow, verse 30, to the Lord and said, if you indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, you give me the victory, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the people of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. First thing that comes to meet me is going to be yours. What is he thinking? And I don't mean, what is he thinking? I mean, you know what he's thinking, and you know what he's not thinking. Something that would normally be offered. It's not a who that he's expecting. He's expecting a what. He was a little too general. It would be something that he would be sacrificed, normally, that would be sacrificed. Whatever comes out of the doors, not whomever. Whatever, verse 31. So he makes this vow to God. In verse 30 and 31, somebody might summarize that and might look at that and call it a rash vow. Right? This is a rash vow. Well, Scripture's not silent on not making rash vows. At Mount Sinai, the Lord said, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember that? In other words, don't be rash in your vows. Don't invoke. Anytime God was invoked as a witness to something, before God, I tell you this, I'm making a vow. Every time God is invoked as a witness to something, it's a serious thing. Solemn vows are serious things. And Scripture has said that throughout, start to finish. Solemn vows are serious things. The book of Proverbs is not silent on making rash decisions or rash vows. What does it mean to be rash?
Quick without thinking.
Yeah. Something it's too quick, it's without forethought or enough thought or depth or whatever. It hasn't sought the proper advice, the proper counsel, it hadn't done the proper homework. Behind it all, though, can be a disrespect for one's word, for the seriousness of one's word. You finish it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
No, no.
Yes, yes. No, no. Yea, nay. That's all that's needed. So behind it all, my dad used to talk about when we were in college, and I don't know what they call them now, but it's basically going to be the same thing. And Daryl, you would know, even though that's not your area, but you probably hear the lingo or the language around. When we were in college at Lipscomb, we had the drop ad slips. You could take a course, and if you just didn't like it, you could drop out within a certain time frame, get your money back. It's after that time frame. I think I remember it was after that time frame. because the school's got to run on how it runs financially. That's his thing. Um, and so there was this period, the drop ad period. You could drop or add, no consequence. And Dad used to talk about this regarding marriage because people would sort of be like, well, I mean, it's almost like they're just signing up for a class, and if it doesn't go well, if it doesn't fit their, figuratively speaking, schedule, their desires for life and how that should go, what they thought it would be, then it's just, just go down, just get a piece of paper and, like down at the courthouse, you get that they're just signing up for something like they're signing up for a class. But in marriage, you've got solemnity of vows, and those vows are serious things. That's not what's being done. And before God in the Old Testament, that's not what was being done. Even in this chapter with this man, verse 30 and 31, is this a rash vow? God had sent out calls and reminders about the solemnity of vows and not taking His name in vain. Should Jephthah be cut some slack here? Because after all, the Lord knows what Jephthah meant and what he did not mean, right? He's not going to expect me to do this, right? As it comes out to be. Look at verse 32 and 33. So Jephthah advanced toward the people of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands. And he defeated them from Aror as far as Minnith, 20 cities, and to Abel Kiraman with a great slaughter. Thus the people of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel. He did go, he did do, and God did as well. God went before him and gave it to him. Okay? God has kept up his end of the bargain. Jephthah's gone in confidence, maybe because of the vow that he has made to God. Believe that God has heard him and will bless him. He goes. Verse 34, though, you've got an oh no. All right, let's think about what we say, how we plan. The book of James, one of those chapters would begin this way. Come now, you who say tomorrow we will go to this city or that city and do this thing or that thing. And what's he say? Well, wait a minute. Hold on here a minute, fella. What is your life? I mean, you don't know anything about tomorrow, right? I'm paraphrasing, of course. You don't know anything about tomorrow. Instead, what you ought to say is, because life is a mist and a vapor, that's just what it is, that's all it is. So, therefore, you ought to say, if it's the Lord wills, we will do this or that. He's made a rash vow. Oh no. You got an oh no moment. When Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and dancing, and she was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. Now, not that picture is certainly not embedded in that picture is not the idea that, well, if he'd have had another one, he wouldn't have been bothered by the fact that, oh no. No, he could have had 15 kids. He could have had 30 kids. He could have had, it doesn't matter. He wasn't intending on sacrificing his child. Oh no. But solemn vows are serious things. So put yourself in the shoes for just a second. And what does he do? I mean, here comes what looks to be a celebration, timbrels and dancing. Why would this be allowed? Why would God allow this? What comes next? Why would He allow this? That would be my consideration in just pure humanity. Why would God? He knows that's not what He meant, right? So let me give you a little story because this I think it'll fit right here. And seeing Mom just makes me think about it. Years ago, Mom was under the hairdryer over there across the street from Lipscomb at the salon that she went to. It was there for years, and was there when we were in school. And there were some ladies talking, And mom's, she's just one of the row of ladies getting hair done on this Friday. And she overheard a conversation between two, one older and one younger. And apparently the one younger was having trouble, had been having some significant issues in the marriage. And the older lady said to the younger, relatively newlywed, something about, well, honey, you just need to leave him. You just need to. And she said, well, I can't do that. Well, what do you mean? Why can't you do that? And the younger lady was responding with, well, it's a faith issue, and here's my background, and I'm a Christian, and here's what, and we don't think that that's the thing to do. And the older lady said to the younger lady, honey, she said, don't you understand that God wants you to be happy? Well, let's ask for a second. Does God mind me being happy? Well, of course not. God doesn't mind me being happy. He's not opposed to my happiness. But where did the lady get that idea that all God's concerned about is my happiness? Where'd she get that? She's trying to correct a Christian mind with, honey, don't you know that God just wants you to be happy? Well, somebody may say, well, Andy, don't you know, Jephthah, don't you know God didn't mean that? Or He knows you didn't mean that. Don't you know, right? There's the assumption. But let me take you to another story that's not under a hairdryer at a salon, but it's in John chapter 11 with real people in a real time and real pain in the death of Lazarus. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And leading up to death, and then the actual time period of going into the death itself, and then after the fact of death, that's pain for the family, that's separation, that's loss. There's not joy around the tomb. The Lord knew that was going to happen. He waited on purpose a couple extra days. Why, if He cared about them, did He allow that to continue? Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you would only believe, you will see the glory of God? See, here's what God knows. There are things that are more important than the mere alleviation of trouble for a time or even a great pain. There are things that are greater, that are deeper, that have to remain. Could God choose to have pulled this away? Hey, I'm not going to expect that. I should not expect that. But what's bigger in this moment, and what's always bigger, is solemn vows are serious things. Now keep looking at what happens. Verse 35, and it came to pass when he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me. Of course, she's probably not getting why he's saying this, right? For I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it. Wow. These are not the words of Balaam, for example. Remember when Balaam, we think about that. When I say Balaam, what do you think of? Talking donkey? Okay. You remember how that happened? Some folks approach Balaam. They want him to do something that the Lord doesn't want him to do. The Lord tells him no. And then they come back and they sweeten the pot. And Balaam's words were, here's what the Lord has said, but stay one more night. I think the most translations say, stay this night here also, and let me see what more the Lord has to say. So the idea is, I tell you what, let me take this to him. Surely right? Let me take this to God. But Jephthah doesn't sound like Balaam. Jephthah doesn't sound like Balaam. It's not, but honey, don't you worry. I'm going to take this back to God. And I know there's no way. He wasn't worried about what God would say. His focus is on what he had vowed. Now, if God chooses to do something else, I mean, he could stay the hand of Abraham, right? He could stay the hand of Abraham in Genesis chapter 22. If Jephthah's in the process of carrying out his vow, and God says, I'm not going to expect that from him. That's not what he meant. He could stay the hand. But Jephthah is not saying, let me check with the Lord. Let's give it some time. Let me get an answer from the Lord. Surely he doesn't. Jephthah's concern isn't what will God do, might do. It's here's what I said. Jephthah shows that solemn vows are very serious. Very.
Just in your opinion, why don't you think the Lord stopped Jephthah from killing his daughter versus he did stop Abraham from killing his son? What do you think the key difference is in that?
Well, I think one key difference is with God's purpose for each one at the time. God in His providence and His sovereignty, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy. I'll do what I want when I want. For my purposes will be. There's something that we sing in a song that comes out. God moves in a mysterious way is the song. God moves in a mysterious way, His wonders to perform. And one of those verses begins, His purposes will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. It's God's purposes. God had a purpose for Abraham. He was going to be the father of many nations, right? God's people. Jephthah has a purpose for a time, but he's been given the victory. He has done what God needed him to do. Otherwise, I don't know. Do we call on God for what we look at as equity? An equitable treatment of people. Well, if you've done this, then why didn't you or wouldn't you do it with? I don't know. But I know this: we should not put that expectation upon God because His response to us might be the same it was for Job. I mean, remember Job now. Job in chapter 1 is given the greatest of compliments. And if it's a resume and a reference on your resume, he's got the greatest reference on earth. Where God says he is blameless and upright. Could you take that to an employer? Right? He's got the greatest reference in the world. And yet, well, wait a minute. If you feel this way about him, why do you allow him to go through all this? See, that's the human nature. The human nature is, well, surely not. Or, well, if he stayed the hand of Abraham, or if he's blameless and upright, why do you allow him to go through? Let somebody go through it that needs a little, needs to learn a lesson. But when you get to the end of Job, toward the end of Job, almost to the end of Job, it seems that Job, not because of anything within him that shouldn't have been, but because he's a human being, that even Job needed to learn a lesson. Because when he finally answered Job, he said, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And then he goes on this great thing about all that God knows and is busy doing that we have no idea how it's at work, why it's at work, when it's at work, when it starts, when it stops, what fills its place, why. Even the blameless and upright had to pause for a minute and say, in that sense, I don't question you. And so God had a purpose for one. He had a different purpose for another. Is the only answer I know other than I don't know. So he gets to, we've got the oh no moment in verse 34. It's supposed to be a time of celebration. She's coming out assuming celebration. He tears his clothes, verse 35. It speaks to the immediate recognition of the situation. Look at the last phrase, though. I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it. Look at what she says. By the way, do you remember when the serpent tested Eve? And what it was about in the garden was, now, did God really say this? Did God really say, or did He really mean this? With that temptation of human nature, look at the daughter's response in verse 36. So she said to him, my father, if you've given your word to the Lord, do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, because the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the people of Ammon. Had God given him something? And all the people something? And she's the one that calls that out. The one that's going to lose her life, is the one that calls that out. You have to do this. After all, God has avenged you and our people, right? But look at her. Then she said to her father, let this thing be done to me. Let me alone for 2 months, that I may go and wander on the mountains and bewail my virginity, my friends and I. So he said, go. And he sent her away for 2 months, and she went with her friends and bewailed her virginity on the mountains. And it was so at the end of 2 months that she returned to her father, and he carried out his vow with her, which he had vowed. She knew no man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went 4 days each year to lament the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite. That last 4-verse section is a mouthful. It's quite a bit there. Verse 36, what does this suggest about her? What does her response suggest about her? Note that she calls out God's deliverance. Okay, so Jephthah, not going back on his vow, gets a lot of praise. When Jephthah is taught, preached about, discussed, Jephthah gets praise for a man who would not go back on his vow. And he did say it first. There's the oh no moment. And she comes out with timbrels and dancing, and it's celebration time for the victory. No doubt others are coming. And he called that out first. He recognized the oh no. He recognized the solemn vow being a serious thing. So it's good that we give recognition. We recognize Jephthah's his faith, his understanding of how you behave before God, the seriousness of vows before God, and so on. And Jephthah gets the praise. I don't recall growing up hearing much other than it being read, but not continuous comment on her. She's heroic. But we don't talk much about Jephthah's daughter. We talk about Jephthah's vow and not going back on his vow and carrying it out. But look what helped him carry it out from his young daughter. Verse 37 and 38 is clear. There was no sense in her mind. What she thought about God here is on display. There's no sense at all in her mind. No consideration at all that they could or even should try to get away from this. Unlike Jonah, right? That's not even a thought. Her words tell us it's not even a thought. No sense that God would eventually change his mind, nor should she try. Look at verse 39. We do not get a sense of, we don't get a scene or a sense. There's nothing there. There's no scene of, and we don't get a sense of Jephthah ever bargaining with God while she's gone. Don't you think we would probably get that if that had happened? We would probably get that. It would make sense to me that we would get that if it happened. Why wouldn't we? Because then we'd get God's response. And maybe we'd have a better answer than I could give Barry. Because we would have God's response. Right? And then I'd say, oh, well, Barry, just look at verse whatever it would be where that finally came out. There's your answer. But we don't have that. There's no scene and no sense of Jephthah bargaining with God. while she's gone. Daryl?
And she came back after 2 months.
Yes.
I mean, she could have tried to flee and
That's right.
easily not pursued her.
That's exactly right.
And there's a lot of parallels with God and Jesus' death on the cross to this.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you read the story, you're like, wow, how can he do that? It's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, God did that for us.
Well, there is no scene and even no sense of that at all given to us. Not just with his bargaining, but by her departure and any attempts. And we don't even have anything about her friends, like Job's friends talking to him. We don't get anything about her friends trying to. We're going to go and lament, and then I'll return. And Scripture says she did. It's interesting, by the way, we don't really have time to discuss this, but it's interesting, by the way, that Jephthah didn't, there's no sense that we get or wording that would suggest that Jephthah asked God for that. She asked, he said go, because he knew what he was going to do. He knew what he had to do. And so there's no sense of him asking the Lord, can she go just for 2 months? Or do I have to do it right now? So when you look at verse 40, to me, the way it wraps up there, 4 days each year, it became a thing that she could be put very easily, I think. Jephthah, yes, but I think she could very easily be put in Hebrews 11. She could be put in Hebrews 11. By faith, so-and-so did such and such. We just don't talk much about her. And so that to me has always been a powerful passage. There are some reminders that we need, that I've needed, and that's why I chose that one. So I wanted to start with that one to give a heroic picture on how we deal with solemn vows before God. So Isaac will be in here next week. I won't even be here. Normally, when Isaac's teaching, I'll be in here. When I am teaching, he'll be teaching upstairs. But next week, I'm in a gospel meeting out of town. Isaac will be in here to teach next week. I don't know what his passage will be. He is still fleshing those out, and we'll all know, and we'll give you all of our passages later. But hope it'll be a good class. But Isaac next week, and he'll do a good job.